The Locked On Podcast Network presents the NFL Big 3 in 30. The three biggest stories in the NFL from our local experts at the Locked On Podcast Network. We bring you the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 30 minutes. The NFL Big 3 in 30 starts now with the biggest story in the NFL.
The deals are done.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast.
All right, Jake, let's start with Jamar. Highest paid non-quarterback in NFL history. We knew it would get there. I think we all knew. Anything surprise you about the 161?
Nothing is surprising to me about the Jamar Chase deal from a financial perspective. I think that it could have been 164 very easily. It just barely jumps over Myles Garrett by $0.25 million instead of $1 full million, which is interesting. $112 million guaranteed, which is not a number I was sure the Bengals would get to for him, but they get there. It beats Justin Jefferson by a lot in the overall money category, of course, and in the guaranteed money category as well. And as is pointed out by others as well on social media, Jamar Chase's contract now runs for the next 5 years. So he was under contract for 2025 already. A 4-year extension on top of that goes to a 5-year total. And for those 5 total years, it's $182.8 million over those 5 years, including the 5th-year option that he was due in 2025. So that works out to be in the mid-30s over 5 years for Jamar Chase. That's the benefit you get in getting those extensions done early. So just to give the full breakdown there, that's a lot of money. Don't get me wrong. That's a lot of money for Jamar Chase. They will have to figure out what the structure looks like. They figured that out. We'll have to figure that out and see what it looks like, see what that tells us about their intent to spend additional money this year, their intent to manage the cap hits in future years, fully expecting some option bonuses here so that Jamar Chase has another big payday coming next year and prorating that cap hit out into the future. The other thing that I wasn't so sure about, and we'll see what exactly this will look like, but Jordan Schultz also indicating in another tweet late on Sunday that both cap numbers are expected to decrease. And I wasn't so sure, James, that Jamar Chase's number would decrease, and I'm not sure how substantial it would be. I was pretty confident about it for T with the franchise tag number at 26 point something million, but I wasn't so sure about Jamar's because looking at Joe Burrow's deal, they didn't reduce his year 5, his 5th-year option cap hit when they did that extension, but they apparently are doing it for Chase. We'll see to what degree, but if they are reducing those cap hits this year, we still need details there, and we'll talk about T's contract as well. That will tell us about their intent for the rest of free agency as well.
Yeah, I think, there's a big difference, and that's why the timing of these is so important. I mentioned getting Jamar's done in March and not June. Well, yeah, now you want the cap hit to go down. Joe's was in September. Who cares if it doesn't go down? It was already done. Like the season was starting.
It was for the following year too, because they got Joe done a year earlier than Jamar. Yeah, sure.
In that's, but there's so much time to forecast that, and you're talking quarterback. Anyways, the point is like now is the time to do it, to shrink these down as much as you can, or at least to a degree, so you can use that money elsewhere. And hopefully that's why there was so much inactivity. Is they're like, look, there's some good players that we want, but we're focused on getting these guys done. They said that they could do the parallel paths thing. I also think that it takes time to get both of these deals done. They're 2 substantial deals. And so now they need to hit the ground running and continue to add to their roster. And by doing it now, because 5-6 days ago, there were people, and this can be like the last thing on Jamar, and then we can get to the financials and stuff on T. But there were people that were like, Jamar's just going to wait out Micah. And that was just clearly not the case. He was not worried about waiting out Micah. I think it was the other way. I think this was making sure that T was taken care of. And the fact that it was really, it's a big layer of this, is Rocky Arsenault being the agent for both of these guys, and T. Higgins switching agents, and how that opened up the door for this to be possible. And then I think we're both under the impression that Jamar was close around the combine. Like they had exchanged numbers, things were getting there. And it sounds like Rocky was like, before we get Jamar done, we're focused on T.
Yeah.
And kind of use that to prioritize T to get both of these done now, which does help the Bengals because you do not want that cap hit at $26.179 million for T. Higgins. And to get that done now, they did a couple of things. One, they were able to get a 4th year with T, but they did something that I'm not sure anyone expected them to have to do, which is give that second year. That second year is guaranteed of this deal. His age 27 season in 2026 is going to be guaranteed now.
And you point out that move that Arsenault made, and that's straight up reported on by Ari Meirov at this point. I think we can consider that to be fact. I mean, Meirov tweeted over an hour ago now, as we're recording this past midnight Eastern time, that Arsenault told the team no Jamar deal without T. And
Got it.
So one, that's clever from the agent's perspective, but two, I think that it tells you about what these guys' relationship is about. And as we get into the details here, the financial details for T. Higgins, I think that T. Higgins, I mean, he's already a fan favorite, but this is putting your money where your mouth is if you're T, to stay in the situation he's in with the Cincinnati Bengals. And you do not see that kind of loyalty from players. Yes, he got paid. Don't get me wrong. He would have gotten paid more on the open market if he had made this very difficult. If he would have stayed with David Mulligetta, he could have made more money. And so what the deal looks like now for T is 4 years, $115 million. So not only did he change agents and strategize with his teammates on the team to make sure that he got a deal to stay in Cincinnati, he also gave them a 4th year. And I think that's probably in exchange for that 2nd year guaranteed. So this is now the 3rd player, in addition to Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow, that the Bengals have given guarantees to outside of year 1 in recent years. And the 2nd non-quarterback, in addition to Jamar Chase, to get guaranteed money from the Bengals outside of year 1. And that $115 million over 4 years is just south of $29 million per year for T. Higgins, who was expected on the open market to be over 30. I think across the board, that would have been the expectation. And there are incentives in that contract for T to get to $30 million per year if he does hit all of those incentives. Now, we don't know what those incentives are yet. We haven't seen the structure of the contracts or anything like that. But the things that I wanted to underline here are, one, the clear desire from T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow to continue to play together in Cincinnati. And two, the Bengals' willingness to play ball here and put guarantees outside of year 1, especially for T. I thought they would have to do it for Jamar. I think we all did. But doing it for T. Higgins as well shows a bit of an evolution for this team that is very noteworthy and will be noteworthy when we look back on it when we're talking about future free agent negotiations for the Bengals.
Yeah, hopefully it's the start of something unprecedented for the Bengals that not only is now precedented, but is just part of what they do. And it's, if you have a really high-end young player or you want to swim in that free agent pool, you're willing to give guarantees in year 2, because that opens up a whole nother level of keeping the Jesse Bateses of the world, of keeping guys like that you draft, develop, and hope become stars. Like, you're hoping Amarius Mims becomes the best right tackle in the league. Well, guess what that means when you go to extend him? That you're paying him guaranteed money in year 2, which would be a great problem to have. And so hopefully that's it. Good for T. By the way, if I'm the Bengals, I would much rather have T for 4 years than 3 years if it means guaranteeing another year. Absolutely. 4 years is way bigger than 3 years with just guarantees in year 1. It's well worth the trade-off there.
March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and who's cutting down the nets. You've got to have those 5-12s. Got to pick a couple 2-3 12s to win in there. Got to get a 13 maybe to beat a 4. FanDuel makes it easy to back them with spreads, totals, game props, with tournament games happening almost every day. There's always something exciting to bet on. The FanDuel app is simple to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly. No waiting around. Looking ahead to the first 4, there's an interesting matchup for the right to play Auburn. We got to find a way to make these games interesting, right? Alabama State takes on St. Francis, PA. FanDuel has Alabama State favored by 3.5. Visit FanDuel.com to get in on the college hoop action all tournament long.
The Falcons did the unthinkable.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast.
This weekend was a deadline to trigger what would be a $10 million roster bonus that is due to Kirk Cousins in March of 2026. So next March, right? That if Kirk Cousins is on the roster past that deadline, which is now passed or will soon pass if it hasn't officially passed, that if Kirk Cousins is on the roster at that point, that $10 million bonus becomes fully guaranteed. And so essentially what you need to know is that the Atlanta Falcons, instead of basically paying Kirk Cousins $90 million for the 14 games they got from him last season before benching him in favor of Michael Penix, now they're paying him $100 million in guarantees for 14 games. So it's much, much better, right? And so the reason why the Falcons are doing this is basically because it's going to buy them time in order for them to facilitate a trade. And hopefully the Falcons are successfully able to trade him. And if they are, they will be able to transfer some of that remaining guaranteed money that they owe him, $37.5 million of that, the $27.5 million in base salary this year and the $10 million roster bonus next year, to another team, right? So instead of $100 million that they owe Kirk Cousins for 14 games, they will, if they are successfully able to trade Kirk Cousins between now and the end of the trade deadline and over the next 8 months, they will then only owe Kirk Cousins $62.5 million for 14 games. So, before I've been very sort of a one-minded note that the Falcons needed to designate Kirk Cousins a post-June 1 cut, just take the loss on the $90 million, take the $40 million hit this year, right? Take the $25 million hit next year in terms of dead money with Kirk Cousins, right? And, I thought that made sense because I figured the chances of a team trading for Kirk Cousins were virtually zero. But I'm mistaken. I realized the error of my ways. I was blind, but now I see. I really do get it now. And I think Terry Fontenot is basically taking the approach is, I'm leaving here with something, right? If you recall Denzel Washington's famous quote when he was talking to Jamie Foxx about losing the Oscar and, to Sean Connery back in 1989 or 1990 or whatever it was. And he was like, I'm leaving here with something. And so he stole like a tray from the after party or something like that. And so Terry's like, I'm leaving here with something. We didn't get what we wanted from Kirk on the field. So we're going to get our money's worth via a trade. And we know, right, that draft pick that the Falcons are going to get is going to be more than worth making up the difference between the money that the Falcons have already spent on Kirk Cousins and the money that the Falcons will eventually spend on Kirk Cousins, right? Because, after you've spent $100 million in guaranteed money, getting a late round draft pick, that's everything that you need, right? So again, I was wrong on that front. I get it now. A late round draft pick is going to do wonders for this football team, right? And even the people, shout out to my guy, Kevin Knight of the Falcoholic, Dirty Birds and Brews podcast. He's been adamant. He's been the opposite of me, adamant from jump. The Falcons need to keep Kirk Cousins. They need to trade Kirk Cousins, right? And shout out to Kevin. He's been on top of this from the front. He's the new prophet here amongst the Falcons fan base. But even he, who thinks the Falcons should try to keep Kirk Cousins to trade Kirk Cousins, last I heard, and maybe he's changed his opinion in the last couple of weeks, but last I heard, he thought like the best case scenario with the Falcons was like a 6th or 7th round pick for him. And, that 6th or 7th round pick that the Falcons could get for Kirk Cousins would be very valuable to this football team, because all you had to do is look at the Falcons draft record under current general manager Terry Fontenot in the round 6s and 7, and you see just hit after hit after hit. Frank Darby, Justin Schaefer, John Fitzpatrick, DeMarco Hellams, Jovan Gwynn, Jason McClellan, Zion Lowe, Casey Washington, right? These 8, 6, and 7 round picks that they've had over the last 4 years, they've averaged a total of 50 snaps in their rookie seasons. That's a huge difference it's going to make for this Falcons football team in the 2025 season, right? That's the same impact that Chris Blair had, who played 47 snaps, or Khalid Kareem, I think, played like 52 snaps, right? And, don't pay any attention to the fact that probably 70% of the people listening to this podcast don't even know who Chris Blair or Khalid Kareem is. Don't let that fool you into thinking that these guys weren't hugely impactful players. So that 6th round or 7th round pick that the Falcons are going to get for Kirk Cousins is going to be huge. It's going to be huge, just as impactful as those guys have been for this team over the years. But you never know. Like, maybe the team will get even better draft pick than a 6th or 7th round pick. Maybe they'll get a 4th or 5th round pick, right? That would certainly move the needle a lot more. They've had a lot, better hits like Tyler Algier and some of those guys in those rounds, right? And I've seen even reports that the Falcons could legitimately buy a draft pick by being willing to take on more of Kirk Cousins' base salary this year, right? Like if they trade Kirk Cousins, that team acquiring Kirk Cousins would have to pay Kirk Cousins the $27.5 million in guaranteed money that he's owed this year, in addition to the $10 million in guaranteed roster bonus next year. But the Falcons could say, hey, we'll take on some of that $27.5 million and you just give us a higher draft pick than a 6 or 7 round pick, right? You know, we've seen multiple reports for teams that have seemingly expressed their interest. Multiple beat writers have said, oh, this team would be interested in Kirk Cousins if he was playing for the veteran minimum, similar to what Russell Wilson played for the Pittsburgh Steelers after he was released with a massive dead money cap hit after that didn't work out in Denver. And they moved on with Bo Nix. And what happened to the Broncos? Did they make the play? Oh, it doesn't really matter. But, you know, a lot of teams want Kirk Cousins, but not at $27.5 million, reportedly, right? A lot of teams would be much more interested in Kirk Cousins at $1.2 million. So if you're the Falcons, like, why not buy back most of that money, right? Instead of, you know, giving away the $27.5 million, hey, we'll eat 25 of that $1 million if you're willing to give us a higher round pick, right? We'll take on 25 of the $27.5 million, right? And we'll get a higher pick than a 6th or 7th round pick. And instead of Kirk Cousins counting like, you know, $40 million against the cap this year, or $37.5 million if you trade him without taking down any of the money, that number's going to be closer to 65. That's even better value, right? That's definitely worth it for the Atlanta Falcons to eat $65 million in dead money this year just to get a higher draft pick. Right. You know, and it's not like that $25 million that you'd be spending for Kirk Cousins in order to buy a higher draft pick could be $25 million that you could use to help out your roster. I mean, because you're going to have to go out of your way to create that $25 million if this is the path that you're going to go down with Kirk Cousins and buying a draft pick. Right. And that $25 million being quote unquote wasted on Kirk Cousins is not really a waste. Right. You know, not for a player that's not going to even play for your football team. But you're going to spend $25 million on like a 4th round pick, right? And that $25 million wouldn't be beneficial to being able to plug multiple holes on your roster that exists right now, where you have like 3 or 4 starters that you need to add so far this offseason still. But, you know, that's not really going to benefit you in any shape or form. And so, you know, to me, none of this made sense, you know, and I was wrong before when I was sitting here talking about cutting Kirk as a post-June 1 cut, right? That just eating that dead money and taking that L and understanding that you took that L and moving on and getting better, you know, instead keeping Kirk is the smarter play, right? Let's see if we can buy a draft pick. So, you know, Terry, I sit here and I say, you are a genius, my friend. Right. And again, buying a draft pick is just one possibility that I've seen other people float out there. Whether that's on a serious option on the table, we will have to see. But guess what? The Falcons have 8 months to figure that out. Right. That's the beauty of this whole situation. Right. That's the timeline of when we can trade Kirk Cousins, because it's about 8 months between now and the trade deadline in November, when after that point, if you haven't moved Kirk Cousins by that point, you can't move him anymore, at least in the calendar year of 2025. But ideally, you know, we're going to be able to trade Kirk much sooner than that. Right. Before the draft. Right. So that we can add that draft pick that 6 or 7 round pick that definitely is going to make a huge difference in this year's football team. Because we know that one thing that Terry Fontenot has done better than anything else is get immediate impact players in the draft.
March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and who's cutting down the nets. You've got to have those 5-12s. Got to pick a couple 2-3 12s to win in there. Got to get a 13 maybe to beat a 4. FanDuel makes it easy to back them with spreads, totals, game props, with tournament games happening almost every day. There's always something exciting to bet on. The FanDuel app is simple to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly. No waiting around. Looking ahead to the first 4, there's an interesting matchup for the right to play Auburn. We got to find a way to make these games interesting, right? Alabama State takes on St. Francis, PA. FanDuel has Alabama State favored by 3.5. Visit FanDuel.com to get in on the college hoop action all tournament long.
Jordan Mason, no longer a member of the San Francisco 49ers. He has been traded to the Minnesota Vikings. Kyle Juszczyk, for a few days, wasn't a member of the 49ers.
You are Locked On 49ers, your daily San Francisco 49ers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Croc, more action for the San Francisco 49ers. And even when they bring a guy back, they still send somebody else packing. So we'll talk about Juice in a second. I want to talk about the draft and retooling and what this might change for the 49ers with some draft plans and how they build this thing back up after they've taken away some pieces early in free agency. But Jordan Mason, it was something that we had talked about, and it isn't a total shock that the 49ers traded Jordan Mason, giving him as an unrestricted free agent. They put the second round tender on him, which is about a little over $5 million contract for 1 year is what that is. And I know a lot of people get confused about the tender and what the 49ers got in return with the trade from the Minnesota Vikings. But essentially what happens with the tender, short version here real quick, and then we'll talk about the actual move and what it means. But, just tendering a contract means, okay, this restricted free agent, it's not an unrestricted free agent, can't go to talk to anybody yet. But once the 49ers put a tender on him, they could put a tender where it was, I think, $3 million. And then you would get, they could have the right to match if he did sign a contract with another team. You put the second round tender on, it was around $5 million. And I think there was a first round tender as well, where a team could sign him. And if they signed that player to an offer sheet, then the 49ers would get a second round pick. Right. And so, but the 49ers just separately, you can also just work out a trade, which is what happened. So the 49ers worked out a trade. Doesn't mean you have to get a second round pick. And they got a lot less than a second round pick, Croc. They got a 2026, so not this draft, but the next draft, a sixth round pick from the Vikings. And then they moved up a few slots from, the early-ish to mid sixth round to the mid to late-ish fifth round, from 187 to 160 in this year's draft. So now after the Debo trade and after the Mason trade, what they have is 2 fifth-round picks and still 11 total picks in the 2025 NFL draft. So it's not a huge return. If you look at the old trade charts, it's the future sixth, usually you dock 1 round. So a future sixth is worth about a current 7th. The move up is about worth a 7th. So they got around maybe a 6th or a couple 7ths in total value as far as trading Jordan Mason, which is barely more than just not trading him away at all if they would have put the third round tender on him. So just as a trade by itself, the 49ers, again, got a little bit worse because Jordan Mason, Croc, was their best running back last year. He was their leading rusher, and he was among the league leaders when he was the full-time guy for the 49ers last year with Christian McCaffrey out, and he's been a really good player. But clearly the 49ers don't view him as a super important asset, didn't view him as a player they wanted to pay a few $1 million a year, $5 million a year. And again, like I know a lot of people say, well, it's a great deal because you got a little bit back in trade and you don't have to pay him $5 million a year. Well, they didn't have to pay him $5 million. That's just the tender that they put on him. They could have decided to put the $3 million tender on him, right? And they could have decided to just sign him themselves before free agency started. Maybe that would have looked different. Give him a long-term contract. So it's not like the second round tender and the $5 million was the only thing they could have done with him. There's other things they could have done. But clearly the 49ers didn't value him a lot, got scraps back for him, and now he's a member of the Minnesota Vikings. And that frees up the San Francisco 49ers and Kyle Shanahan to go shopping a little bit at the running back position too, Croc, which I think is going to be something that we're going to have to talk a lot more about between now and the end of April.
Yeah. And we're watching some of the running back prospects, so we can discuss that to our audience, of course. But why would the 49ers, if you have intentions on trading him, why not place a tag on him where you may be able to complete a trade with that tag? Or did they never see a team trading for him? Right? Like if I'm going into these kind of like negotiations or whatever, right? This offseason is like, hey, there's a chance we trade him away. Let's not put a second round tender on him because nobody's gonna give that up. Is there a fourth round tender? I know you said third round.
I think this changes all the time, and it's really hard to keep up with some of these things. But there used to be other tenders. Now, as far as I know, the only tender is there's a right of first refusal, which was $3 million in this case for a restricted free agent. And so they could have put the $3 million tender on him, and then they would have the right to agree to whatever contract he agreed to with another team. They could match that, but you don't get any return if he goes somewhere else. So you get nothing back, or it's a second or a first. And the second is like $5 million, and for the 1 year contract, and the first round tender is like $7 million or something like that for the 1 year contract. So there's nothing in between. I think there used to be a different tender where you could slap a fifth round on them, and that's probably what they would end up doing if that was the case. And but yeah, so it was either you get nothing back, or you get a second rounder back, or you just have to figure out your own trade, which is what the 49ers did. And clearly he wasn't part of their plans, and they don't think that it's going to be a big loss. And it was, they didn't get a lot back. Like they let their best running back from last season go and got almost zero back just to not have to pay him anything this year. And that kind of tells you where they're standing, because again, they got a little bit worse. I don't know how big of a asset you think Jordan Mason was, but I think in the big picture, he was certainly worth keeping around for $5 million for one more year, or maybe a 2-year contract that could have, lowered the number a little bit or something like that. Because, with Christian McCaffrey's injury history, with Garendo's injury history, and with how good of a pure runner Jordan Mason is, he's a nice player. And so they viewed the Garendo and whatever's coming in the draft, probably Patrick Taylor, as a group of backs where they're like, yeah, if Christian McCaffrey's healthy, we're not going to give anybody else the football anyway. So why are we going to pay a backup running back $5 million is, I think, the way that they looked at it. And we've seen that before with a healthy Christian McCaffrey. Nobody else sees the field.
Yeah, definitely not getting that kind of money. Here's my thing with that, with the trade and just the value of it. I think you and I both feel like, man, you could replace running backs. They're one of the easier positions to replace. But the one thing that's difficult to replace with him is just the experience, right? Like you could draft somebody 3rd round, 4th round, 5th round, 6th round, undrafted, and one of these guys you're going to get some legit production out of. But with him, you knew exactly what you were getting, and I felt because of that, it was. I would have liked to see them just kind of build that 1-2 punch tandem, or however they want to do. I mean, shoot, your backup running back with Christian McCaffrey healthy, he's only getting 1 or 2 carries a game anyway. But just someone where if he does go down, are we going to get some legit production out of this guy? I think that right there, to me, I value that more than 2 7th-round picks. Now, if you would have told me, oh, you get 4th-round pick for him, then I'd be like, all right, you don't want to pay him, $5 million and you get a 4th-round pick. That's a little bit easier to kind of find that back that you're looking for, give you a little bit more wiggle room. 49ers have a lot of picks right now, but I don't, if it's to get, lower money against the cap, maybe that's what they're doing. And it makes sense. I know you said, well, they don't value him a whole lot, but maybe it just was a money type thing. And they're like, this is the easiest way to kind of at a position where you're not going to get a lot of carries, and we can find someone to replace you and get production. But they've kind of had a hard time with that, at least finding that guy in the 3rd round. Now, on the 6th round undrafted guys, they've done a terrific job. I mean, Jordan Mason was one of those guys. He was undrafted and did an exceptional job when he finally got to get his touches. But mid-round, that's where they've kind of struggled. And I don't know. I think I value on a team, if you are expecting to win this year, I value him more than 2 7th-round picks.
Value knowing that you have a guy who could be amongst the league leaders in rushing if your top guy goes down. It's a kind of a valuable piece if you're but the 49ers clearly from the very, very top ownership down have a different value system going into this season. I think that's one of the clear things. And it's not cap. Like the 49ers could have fit Jordan Mason in under the cap and not had a problem. That's just $5 million extra. And it happened at with the similar timing of them bringing back Kyle Juszczyk. And the money was kind of close. So I wonder if it was one or the other. It was like, okay, well, we value what Juszczyk brings more than we value what Jordan Mason brings. If we can find a trade for Jordan Mason, we'll do that. And we'll bring back Kyle Juszczyk. And it feels like that might have been one of the factors in all of this as well. And obviously hoping Christian McCaffrey is going to be that guy, liking what you saw in the 2nd year running back, Isaac Garendo, knowing it's a good running back draft. And that's another reason why they probably didn't get more for Jordan Mason. There wasn't a lot of teams maybe bidding. It was because it is a good running back draft. And why would a team give a 4th-round pickup when they think they could probably get a rookie version of Jordan Mason potentially in the 4th or 5th round? So that's why the 49ers ended up getting what they ended up getting for Jordan Mason.